on unemployment, these are 1930s levels of unemployment. If we don't learn our lessons from history, we don't understand the pain and the suffering at a human level, the misery at a human level that will cause, but equally the depression and the mental health issues, the way in which that impacts on families and communities will be absolutely devastating. And at the same time, of course, we've got a very hard right sitting there in the background, lurking in the corners of our society in a much more difficult way for us to challenge right now online than perhaps it was previously. But they're there waiting to pounce on the anxiety, fear and misery caused by a growing deep recession. So there's no plan from government. And I know that because I'm involved in these discussions with government. They have no plan. They have no industrial strategy to recover. Their plan is based on existing right-wing ideologies. It's shared by Trump and others around the world, that right-wing global access of neoliberalism that we've seen for the last 40 years is very much at the forefront of their thinking about how we'll recover from this COVID crisis, address Brexit, of course, and address the climate change crisis as well. The market will not deliver that. We understand that, but they are intent right now on making our class, working people, our families and our communities pay the price for yet another crisis not of our making, just as they did at the end of the financial crash over 10 years ago now, 12 years ago now, where we saw 10 years plus of austerity politics crippling our societies and communities. Of course, there is an alternative to this. These are political choices. We've always said that, and we can be incredibly proud of the role that the People's Assembly has played over the last 10 years in putting those alternatives very clearly and forcefully on the agenda and transferring my party, the Labour Party, to being a party that's very clearly anti-austerity, not just the largest party in Europe now, but of course an anti-austerity party. So if we're going to build back better, this requires state intervention. It's an alien concept for the Tories, of course, but not to us and not to many other neoliberal governments around the world. Not too far away, just in Germany and France, direct state intervention has played a key role in defending jobs and core sectors of the economy, not just now, but since the ending of the First World War. The short-time working provisions in Germany were introduced in 1914, and they've proved to be a successful model during downturns in demand or particular economic crisis in protecting jobs and families, sectors, whole sectors of the economy indeed, and of course skills that are so necessary to rebuild the economy post-COVID. So we've got a situation where in Germany and France we have short-time working provisions where workers are being allowed to go back to work on a 50% basis, sharing the work between everybody. You won't see the number of job losses there that you're starting to see here in manufacturing or other sectors of the economy. And they're using the remaining downtime to upskill, to retrain the workforce. This is not radical. This is not revolutionary. It's actually good politics and good economics. And the state is subsidizing that for its own version of the job retention scheme. So a job retention scheme too is very much on our agenda. And we need to force government to take that more seriously and introduce a program of support for those sectors that will not get back to anything like the pre-COVID normal from October on. In the medium term, demand issues are having a really negative impact on core sectors. Aerospace and the automotive sector will be two. Of course, hospitality, tourism, aviation, retail, they're all other sectors, core sectors of our economy where people's confidence or lack of confidence right now, genuine fears and anxieties, social distancing, all of these challenges are going to create real problems for businesses to re-emerge from COVID in any sort of way that defends the number of jobs that we had pre-COVID moving forward, unless we take direct action. And that's where the government really needs to step in now with those sorts of positions around shared work, job rotation and protection for skilled jobs that have been taken elsewhere. We also need to see specific sector support and an equity stake in that. If we're going to be supporting businesses, then the state needs to own those businesses. Let's get an equity stake an infrastructure stake in those businesses, so they can't simply pick them up and walk away with them later, and clear criteria in there around the protection of jobs and future investment in skills and research and development to ensure that these industries are producing the sorts of goods as we move forward that we actually need to have a just transition towards that greener, cleaner economy that we all strive for. Diversification of our products and repositioning of our productive capacity is really important if we're going to meet the climate change challenges that we've got in front of us. We've had this discussion with Rolls-Royce. Moz mentioned it in her introductions there. We're in discussions with them right now about if we're not going to be producing aero engines at the sorts of numbers that we were pre-COVID. As we come out of this, then what else do we need to produce that's actually useful in our economy? How do we reposition and repurpose our tooling, our skills, our expertise, our employees? How do we make sure that we protect jobs whilst producing things here that we need to support a transitioning economy? The infrastructure is key to that. Public sector investment, £296 billion a year, making sure that we're using that money to defend jobs and skills, opportunities for our kids to get into decent apprenticeships, to transition our economy and meet those demands. We've got a whole host of shovel-ready projects that we've put forward already, from retrofitting our homes, but making sure that we're manufacturing the heat pumps and the domestic energy storage capability, wind turbines for domestic settings, and all of those other goods that go into retrofitting our domestic and commercial property. Really important that we do that, but making sure that we're equally manufacturing the goods here we need in order to make that real and not simply importing them from overseas. Energy generation, whether that's the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon, and we're an island, for God's sake. Let's use our tides to generate our electricity, but let's make sure we manufacture those turbines here. And let's learn the lessons from wind turbine, the wind farms. We've got the largest single wind farm off the coast of the Humber here in the UK in the North Sea, yet we don't produce a single wind turbine here in the UK. We import every single one of them. That's disgraceful. That's completely and absolutely unacceptable. And we need to transition our economy and make sure that we're producing those goods here. Of course, we need to put broadband into everybody's home, but we need to manufacture the high-speed fibre optic cable here in the UK and not import that from North America in order to do it. Hundreds of thousands of miles to line our streets with fibre optic cable. Quite disgraceful that they're even considering doing that rather than manufacturing that here. New council homes, transitioning our auto industry from combustion engines to EVs, electric vehicles, hydrogen-powered vehicles. The aerospace sector, thinking about the plane and engine of the future, using hydrogen and synthetic fuels, carbon neutral technologies to make sure that we can still go on our holidays and do our things, but not ruin our planet at the same time. The R&D that's going into that at the moment needs to be protected, and our jobs need to do it. Universal basic income, a whole series of things, automation, artificial intelligence, digitalization. These are all threats as we see them right now in the hands of capital alone, but they're real opportunities if we can grasp ourselves the commonwealth that we create via the use of that sort of technology. We share the gains of that productive gain in a manufacturing capacity and elsewhere across the economy to ensure that people benefit and it's not simply profit for big business. So I'll just finish on this. None of this just happens. Nothing just happens in society. You have to fight for it. I always say it's not called a struggle because it's a stroll in the park, and it's not. It's hard work. There's no eventual win and there's no eventual loss. It's a constant battle between the interests of working people in our class and the interests of those who want to rip everything away from us and line their own pockets. So don't moan about it. Get out there, organise, get involved in your groups, get active, join your union, be part of the collective solution, and I look forward to the debate to come. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm struck by the comments you made about the lack of political support in Britain and the potential for targeted support, but the political decision that it will not happen for places like retail, for areas that are hardest hit at the moment, like retail and manufacturing and the aviation industry. And in response to the demands for target and support for industry, what have we had? We've had Min Davis, Employment Minister, talking about more frontline work coaches and a kickstart scheme to create more jobs for young people, which reminds me of the YTS scheme that never created any jobs for young people. It supplied cheap labour to the labour market. So thanks, Steve, for your introduction. This session is being streamed live on the People's Assembly national and local websites. It's being streamed by Unite and the Institute of Employment Rights. And the second speaker I'd like to call in is Cad Jones. Cad Jones is a director of the Institute of Employment Rights. Cad, over to you.
Thanks, Mars, and thanks for the invitation. It's great to join the mighty People's Assembly platform. It's always hard to follow Steve, but as ever, I've learned from his contribution, so welcome all. I'm here today wearing both an Institute of Employment Rights hat and a Campaign for Trade Union Freedom hat. My main focus of work is on employment rights and trade union freedoms, and if done properly, we believe both can deliver an economy and jobs fit for the 21st century. I was on a Zoom this week and someone said that the pandemic has created a portal through which we can step into the future. That's a great image. It's not so much back to normal, but back to the future, and more importantly, back to a better future that we all want to see. But as we know, a better world won't be delivered to us by this government, and whatever narrative they use about us all being in this together, as Steve said, we know that we only get what we fight for. The future depends on us collectively raising our voice and actively and loudly demanding the changes that we want to see. At the Institute of Employment Rights, we've been holding governments to account for the past 30 years, from Thatcher in 1979 through to New Labour years and onwards to today. And I have to say that the only time that we ever got a hearing from politicians was under the Corbyn and MacDonald regime. They listened when we said the system of employment rights and union freedoms wasn't working. They worked with us to draft our ideas up into proposed legislation. They understood the role, purpose and worth of trade unions and workers. But that new dawn wasn't to be, and we now have the Tories in power, which another debate, another time. But in this debate, I want to focus on just two things that I think we should aim to achieve in the coming years. First, we need to hold on to our vision of how the world of work should look. And in one sense, the pandemic has helped us along that path, because it's not just health that's been threatened in recent months, it's the well-being and the welfare of our people. The pandemic exposed the way our labour laws fail the most vulnerable. So whether that's by low pay, job insecurity, failure to provide health and safety protections and much more, labour law in the UK is not fit for purpose and needs updating. In IER's vision of the world of work, we are demanding three things. I'll just focus on three. First, all workers should be treated the same in law. So forget the employee, the worker, the self-employed, the agency, the gig worker, all that confusion. Anyone who works for an employer should be called a worker and should be entitled to the full suite of employment rights from day one of their employment. Second, we need an effective enforcement mechanism to ensure that those rights are enforced. That mechanism would be best delivered, as we all know, by a trade union. And unions are recruiting as workers see the need for protection in this pandemic period. We saw the role that Peter's union played, the NEU, in the recent back-to-school fiasco, recruiting, training and organising a whole army of health and safety reps in the workplace. But for unions to be effective, they need better access and recognition rights so that they can enter and engage with workers, particularly in the private sector where coverage is very low. We've seen external bodies like the HSE have failed miserably to live up to their monitoring and enforcement role. That's not to say we should let them off the hook, but our demands should be for trade union recognition at work And the more people, as Steve says, join the unions and organise, the more likely we are to win recognition ballot votes at the workplace. And the third thing we need is unions, not just at workplace level, great though that is, but at the sectoral level too. Again, the pandemic highlighted the benefits of engaging with trade unions, and Steve's just outlined some of it. The TUC, Unite, the NEU, all engaged with relevant ministers who were forced to take advice from the trade union movement. Yes, reluctantly, and yes, only because the ship was sinking. But imagine if the UK operated like so many other nations around the world, as Steve's just pointed out, sitting around the table with trade unions to discuss how to operate industry, how to run the health service effectively, how to run the education sector, the resale sector, the aviation sector. How much better would the world be? We all know that when employers engage with trade unions, health and safety improves, level of training improve, investment and research and development all improve. What's more, unions bring a wage premium to the table. Latest figures show that when unions negotiate pay, workers receive at least 8% more than wages of those who are imposed unilaterally by the boss. The union wage lift puts money in people's pockets, money that's then spent and helps boost the sales of goods, which itself increases jobs, increases the tax revenue to the exchequer, reduces the need for in-work benefits as people are paid a decent wage. It's win-win. By building better jobs with trade unions sitting around the planning table, you strengthen the economy, you reduce inequality, and you lift society out of the race to the bottom that we've slumped into during these years of austerity. The government recognised the benefit of sectoral organisation, by the way. In fact, the government has set up 5 sectoral bodies to plan the future of industry. The only problem is the only people not at the table are the representatives of those who produce the wealth, provide the services and keep this economy turning. In other words, the workers. No worker reps, no trade unions on those sectoral committees. That's a disgrace. And if we don't change that situation, then they will build a world of work to suit them. Companies, like banks, will be bailed out using taxpayers' money, and workers will be left with nothing more than the bill again. But we've learned the lessons from the 2008 crash. We've lived through the sacrifices made during this pandemic. People are rightly angry and expecting better. So that takes me to the second thing we need to achieve. We need to hold the Labour Party to account. Those 3 core policy ideas that I just outlined were embedded in the 2017 and 2019 Labour Party manifestos. They were extremely popular with the public. They were even included in the 10-point plan that Keir Starmer pronounced as his vision for the future. The problem is, Keir's vision seems to be getting a bit blurry, and yes, there is a pun intended there. We can't allow those policies that inspired so many people to join and engage with politics to be lost in a rush to the centre ground. The Labour Party are currently consulting via the National Policy Forum. IER submitted a paper. It's called Reconstruction After the Crisis, Repaying the Nation's Debt to Our Workers. I urge you to read it. You can download that paper from the Institute of Employment. I think my colleague James is putting it into chat box. The paper highlights in more detail than I can in 8 minutes the failures of labour law and what needs to be done to correct it. No doubt our paper will be ignored. We don't expect much from the parliamentary route to change, but the marker will be down. If the Labour Party refuses to listen, as looks likely, it will be up to people to decide their next step. That's why platforms like the People's Assembly are so important, and the Morning Star, as Moz raised at the beginning. Both bring people together. IR is a charity, not a campaigning organisation. We offer the ideas and the arguments, the tools for organisation. It's up to others to run with those ideas. So, 2 challenges, 3 policy priorities, one hell of a job ahead of us. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Cad. Certainly some of the, I should remind everyone taking part in this that there is a chat box that you can raise questions or comments, and at the end of the introductions there'll be an opportunity to have some discussion. Cad's raised the question of fight and building the movement for the fight. And certainly I think Shaza and Leslie Bowman would be interested in those comments. The enforced workplace rights and employment rights of workers has never been more important than now. And across the country, not just in the private manufacturing or industrial sector or in the tourist sector, but in public services, we have seen local authorities trying to dismiss and re-engage staff on worse terms and conditions. We've got issuing of redundancy notices without consultation with trade unions. So there is a big task, but as Steve has already said, nothing just happens. We have to be the builder of a new creation, a new body, and get some of that confidence. Because we have got examples of where we've won. The NEU is a prime example. The government saying kids would go back to school on the 2nd of June. And it was the NEU, it was parents, it was their communities that banded together to say that won't happen, along with the other education unions. So we shouldn't forget our successes. Building that movement and the vision of the future, I want to bring in Pete Middleman. Pete is the regional secretary of the NEU in the Northwest, and he's also vice chair of the TUC, and that region has been doing much work and produced a document on what the future should be for their area. And I think there's something that we can all learn from that. So I want to hand over to Pete.
Thanks very much, Moz, for that introduction, and thanks to Steve and Cad for setting up my contribution, which, as you say, I think was initiated by the production of the paper in the Northwest TUC, aims for a post-pandemic workers consensus, which I understand is gathering some momentum in other regions, and in fact being a catalyst for some pan-regional work in the North. And just its seeds really were very bureaucratic, I'm afraid to say. Some of the regional secretaries in the region, as we were looking inevitably at the lockdown, were agreed to get together just to see how we could provide some reciprocal support amongst the unions to ensure that members' best interests were kept in mind as staff in union regional offices were facing the prospect of working from home. But from that seed grew the idea that we needed to very early on get ahead of what was going to be the anticipated impact of the crisis and the recovery from the crisis, informed, as Steve and Cad have both alluded to, by experiences that we've all gone through since 2008 and actually since the end of the post-war consensus. And I think one of the factors that was most important in generating those discussions and in producing the paper was a recognition that the movement's done some excellent work very early on, both at TUC level and at individual union affiliate level, furlough scheme being uppermost amongst them. But I think we recognise that as we come out of this, good negotiators around conference tables or in Zoom meetings, as is more accurate the case, won't shape the recovery in the interests of our class. And neither will votes in local elections every year or parliamentary elections every 5 years. But building a community voice and an agency in the political and economic, the way that political and economic decisions are made, will change the agenda in a way that will benefit the working class. And I think we recognised that the scale of that was pretty daunting, because it's an enormous ask. But we've got to start somewhere, I think was our view. And I think we also recognise that we can't contract this struggle out to politicians, to what some people might think was previously a safety net provided by EU regulations. It's a struggle that has to be built, waged and won in our communities, not least, I think, to equip some of the progressive politicians with the reassurance that an appetite for some meaningful change does actually exist. So I'm not going to speak to all of the paper. I think it's being posted in the chat. Colleagues can read it at their leisure, but I'll just briefly run through the 5 main topics. And interestingly, these do arise from existing TUC policy in the form of their campaign plan and their charter for a new deal for working people. But I think we've supplemented it in the Northwest. It made it possibly slightly more openly, nakedly political than might otherwise be the case, and might otherwise be contained in documents like the TUC Better Recovery, which I would urge you to look at online as well. But the 5 main topics begin with a stronger voice at work, and lending from an awful lot of the work that CAD and their colleagues at the IER have done around a progressive industrial relations bill, focusing on the value of collective bargaining, and not least in reducing inequality, redressing that balance between the proportion of GDP that's paid out in wages that as opposed to goes to profit. Secondly, looking at employment, security and flexible work, and focusing on planning rather than the economy being market-led, the competence of workers to demand a new settlement as a result of their experience from the crisis, and of course the role that green jobs will play in a productive economy. There's a section on welfare, tax and public services, and I don't think you need to look any further than the experience of social care during this crisis as to the way that certain sections of our economy and our society will need to be valued much greater in the future, including financially, in terms of reward and compensation, in terms of pay. There's a section in there on safe, satisfying and dignified work, looking at issues around health and safety, looking at some of the malign influences that have emerged in our economy, lean work and just-in-time work, and what others might call the alienation of workers that needs to be addressed if the economy is to serve working class people, I think, going forward. And then there's a 5th section on, and some might be surprised to learn that these words appear in formal TUC documents, but building class unity. That has to bring everything else together, learning from those lessons in 2008, looking at the very concept of democracy, democratic participation, the shape, the role of our civic institutions. But the 2 bits of it that I really want to focus on are 2 of the recommendations that our paper contains. This is a paper which is now being adopted by the Northwest TUC Regional Council back in May, and will form the central core of our work plan for the months going forward, certainly for the next 12 months. And the first one is a recognition of the role that political education needs to play. Now, a lot of union affiliates will have their own political education courses, usually aimed at shop stewards. Other unions don't have any. That exists, as far as I can see, is of mixed quality, quite frankly. And I think there is a role for unions to refocus on providing political economy education to their stewards, but it really does need to go beyond that, I think we've concluded. So when it comes to food bank users, those who rely on universal credit, unemployed workers, unorganised workers, including the precarious workers that CAD mentioned, to enable them to be able to rationalise why they need to use food banks when both members of a household continue to go out to work, why they rely on universal credit to top up inadequate wages, why their housing costs are outstripping their ability to meet them. I think, without being delivered in a patronising way, needs to be explained. They need to understand the economic, ideological and political decisions that lead to those manifestations. And I think the movement is uniquely placed, both in terms of the skills of tutors, if that's what you want to call them, and in terms of the off-the-shelf resources that we've got to enable that to be delivered, to generate the type of anger that is entirely legitimate, the type of hope that will be necessary if we are to mobilise our communities in a way that is going to make a significant difference and impact on political decisions that will affect those communities. And the second recommendation was who we work with in making that possible. So trades councils are the voice of the TUC in the community. For those who might be joining the meeting who've never heard of a trades council, because lots of them are moribund, lots of them are less active than they were decades ago, but they still provide an extremely valuable resource vehicle for the movement to take its message into those unorganised communities. Allied organisations, as well as local trades councils, including unemployed workers centres where they exist, in organisations like the People's Assembly, are going to be important in that as well. And speaking, Moz introduced me as North West TUC Vice Chair, which I am. That's an elected position, but I am a day-to-day trade union bureaucrat as well. But the union bureaucracy, we've been arguing, needs to work much harder to promote the work of trades councils, to have conversations with union branches, which aren't always easy because we recognise that shop stewards are too few and far between in many places. We're relying on the same people to do a number of different roles in our union branches. But this strikes us as an opportunity to perhaps bring newer people into branch life in trade unions, perhaps younger workers that might not hold official union posts, but can represent the union in forums like trades councils of an evening, of a Saturday morning, and ensure that the work of those branches is embedded in those communities. If we get this right, and we recognise that it's a big task, and we recognise that it's going to take a little bit of time, but we have got to start somewhere, we think that this is not just essential, but we think it's a possible, really valuable springboard for the movement to begin to make the type of gains, the type of successes, to turn around some of the defeats, to avoid some of the inertia, and not to win the ultimate goal, because as Steve has rightly said, the struggle will continue, but providing that springboard and beginning to win the types of victories that will provide confidence for organisations to take control of their own destiny.
Sorry, thanks, Pete, for that. I think one of the important points you've made that we maybe need to pick up in the discussion, so keep your chat comments coming, is that this is a job for us all, and it's not something that we can contract out to other parties. It is a job for all of us. It's a job for us within the Trades Council movement, within our union branches. And certainly we do have new opportunities at the moment. We have 200,000 new members within the trade union movement, some of whom have never taken part in, for instance, meetings of their branches or in their workplace, who are now can have the opportunity to take part in Zoom meetings. We have, there is no doubt
Moz did warn us at one stage that,
I wonder, could you jump in there, Steve? If that's okay, Moz. I think our hotspot's not working. I think that we'll just take some Q&A maybe, and I'll send them over to you now. Steve, if you just want to have a quick update on maybe what the People's Assembly are doing at the moment, and I'll get you some comments from the people watching.
Okay. Thanks very much. Well, look, it looks like Moz has dropped out of broadband. How useful it would have been to have had high-speed fibre optic broadband over the last 4 months, in everybody's home. And never forget that was another policy commitment from Labour at last election, and it's something that very much we're going to be delivering on. Look, I'm in a strange place here because I am normally the chair. I am the one of the vice chairs of the People's Assembly nationally, and I'm very proud to do it. But I was a panelist today, so Moz has gone off. So until Moz comes back, I'll take over the proceedings here. I'm just waiting for some questions to come over. Ramona, working behind the scenes, was...
Yeah, Steve, if you look at your WhatsApp.
Hold on. I'm looking up. I've got to look at my WhatsApp now. So it's technology being used at its best. So Ramona was working behind the scenes, just gathering comments from yourselves to see how we can take a discussion going forward for the next 20 minutes or so. So we've got, let's have a look. I'm just going through a few questions now. Leslie saying what we've seen happen in the 1980s, this will be worse than the 1980s, and certainly it will if we don't step up and do something. about that. That's the challenge for all of us, Leslie. Andy Bain, important reminder about the far left lurking in the background, absolutely. Jenny Douglas, spot on from CAD, well done. CAD, a good analysis there from CAD on a whole series of things and the work of the IER and the fantastic work that they did, quite rightly so, to get that that agenda, that manifesto commitment around sectoral bargaining, trade union, collective rights, not just individual rights, of course, in the manifesto for Labour at the last election. Believe me, that's going nowhere. CAD, we might have a change in leadership, but our policy position is exactly as it was 2017, 2019, and we'll build on that. We're going nowhere, not today, not next week, not next year, not ever. That's our party, and it will be our party forever and a day. It's certainly my party since the 1980s. Richard Mackley, Pete Middleton, well said, Peter. Class unity and political education are key going forward. So well said there, Peter. We are by far the largest class in its own time that we collectively organise to take control. Very well said there, Richard. So, look, okay, there's no specific questions that have come through yet on WhatsApp from our panel. So we'll just push it back over to CAD to talk a little bit more about what she ended up with, really, which was this position that, you know, as a class, I've always said that, you know, it's a struggle, not a stroll in the park. And if you look at the history of social progress, from the abolition of apartheid through to the civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matters movement now, all of the change, the positive change in society has not come through writing letters. It's come through getting on streets. And that's what we need to do in a mass way across our movement in order to demand the changes. And if that means breaking those laws you were talking about before, CAD, then that's exactly what we have to do. Bad laws need to be broken. So, CAD, over to you for a little bit more on that, and then I'll come to you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. It's absolutely right, yeah. And Bob Crow always used to say, if you struggle, you won't always win, but if you don't struggle and challenge, then you won't win. And that's what we've got to keep in our mind, that it's got to be. There will be, and it's got to be, a struggle, and we can learn from our history as well. If we look back over things that were done in the past, what worked, what didn't work, what engages people. It's fantastic what Peter's talking about in the Northwest and the way he's got everything going. And political education is bound to be important, but activity is as well. And I hear rumours that people are talking about a People's March for Jobs, because as everybody has said, the number of job losses that are going to be in the near future is just incredible. We don't want people standing on the sidelines watching this, suffering from it, not engaging with it. And the best way to engage people is to organise something, as the People's Assembly knows very well, and plan for sort of some kind of direct action, because it is right, you can't contract out responsibility for this to other people. We have to take some control. So People's March for Jobs sounds great to me. Excellent, proactive, engaging, collective action that's need extra parliamentary active action that will engage people. So just what we need to capture the anger and the frustration that so many people are feeling at the moment. So when that will happen, I don't know. As I say, I'm only hearing rumours at the minute, but if we could organise for a People's March for Job that has feeder factors coming in from different regions around the country, like what Pete's doing in the Northwest, then I think that would be brilliant and something to look forward to.
Right, well, Mozzy's back, so I'm back over to you, Moz. You can take control of the rest of the meeting.
Sorry about that. The hotspot went cold. So I heard the last bit of what CAD was saying, and before I was cut off, Pete had raised the whole issue about local organisation, and that is really what we're all talking about. We're talking about building that movement that was agreed right at the start of the People's Assembly, but we have the start, I think, here today of a movement for jobs in every city, town and village in Britain. We've got that new growing trade union membership. We have the trades councils, who are the unions in the community. And I think Pete talked about the role of trades councils. And it seems like with new opportunities for communicating more easily with our ordinary people in the communities, in our union branches, at every level of our unions. These are opportunities we shouldn't miss. I'm sure this could be developed within the chat box. But anyone, either Pete or Steve, that would like to come in at this point, raise your hands, because I can't see. Pete, okay.
Yeah, I think Steve had just invited me to follow cards actually, Moz, while you were away. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that. And yeah, I mean, Leslie talked in a question about the parallels of the 1980s. If we are going to be seeing levels of unemployment matching that or surpassing that, then obviously a response is needed. One of the things from the 80s that I miss, apart from Liverpool winning Premier Leagues, was the impact that organised unemployed workers had. And I talked in my contribution about how we need to mobilise unorganised and unemployed workers again, as well as those in our unions who are still in work. What we don't have is institutions to the extent that we had then of unemployed workers centres. And if mobilising them includes physically mobilising people on demonstrations or initiatives like a People's March for Jobs, then I think that is welcome and very worthy of consideration, either as a catalyst for a greater mobilisation or as the culmination of work that we do to mobilise them. I think that is absolutely essential. And if it leaves a legacy of community-based unemployed workers centres that become hives of subversive activity, then that's good as well. And then just on Richard's point about the political education, there's definitely been an element during the lockdown of workers seizing some sort of democratic control of their workplaces. It did happen in schools. The terms upon which schools reopened more widely, most schools were open all the way through the crisis. So I would remind comrades for the children of key workers and for kids from vulnerable families. But when they opened more widely, 4 or 5 weeks after Boris Johnson said they would, that was because of the control on a health and safety initiative that teachers and support staff took. But I think it needs to be more than that, doesn't it? All of the sectors that have been affected, I mentioned social care, but it's sanitation, it's telecoms, every sector of the economy. There's been some element of workers being consulted or setting the terms by which they would continue to deliver vital services in a way that hadn't been evident for a long time. And that is something that I think needs to continue. The concept of us throwing the keys back at the bosses at the end of this crisis and then allowing them to continue to do stuff to us rather than take us along with them and allow for some pluralist consensus in workplaces to break out is inconceivable. And I think that the union movement itself actually has got a massive challenge in ensuring that the confidence that I think has been evident to ensure that there's some degree of plurality over the way workplaces is run has to be one of the issues that is sustained once this crisis is over.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Was that you indicating, Steve?
Yeah, I'd never miss an opportunity to say something, Moz, you know me.
Well, I've also got a specific question for you.
Oh, okay, very good. Oh, well, that's better.
No, that's fine. That is coming on the chat box, and it's about your comments around nationalisation. And the question is, what role is there for nationalisation if we need to redirect the economy towards a green economy?
Yeah, well, what a great question. Unfortunately, we've got a Tory government, of course, that couldn't be further away from nationalising anything at the moment. We've got radical positions inside our own party, of course, about taking control of those core foundation industries that are going to be at the centre of transitioning our economy. I couldn't agree more. I mean, billions of pounds are being handed over to business now without any criteria being established on them at all, not even the basic rule of thumb that they must be utilised to defend jobs and skills and investment here in the UK. So it's UK taxpayers' money just willy-nilly being handed over to big corporations to and back out to corporate shareholders or buy back shares or line the pockets of boards of directors. It's quite disgraceful that no clear criteria around the protection of jobs and investment in our communities and the long-term future for those industries are at the core of that sort of state level of investment. And that's where, you know, an equity stake in the business in return for that money is key. That's where public ownership of key sectors within the economy is fundamental to the way in which we transition our economy to meet the challenges of climate change, for example, in the instance that you just raised in your question. You know, if we're going to transition our economy in a just way so that working people in our communities are actually at the centre of that discussion and are the victors in this discussion about a new economy, and not just thrown under the bus like Thatcher did when she transitioned, in her own words, from a coal industry to non-fossil fuel, or the import of coal, of course, from elsewhere around the world, and decimated towns and villages across our economy, many of which are still decimated now. I drive through them now and we've still got third generation unemployment. We've got alcohol problems. We've got mental health issues. We've got drug abuse. We've got, you know, a whole poverty at levels that, you know, you wouldn't expect to find in the 5th richest nation on our planet, let alone in the heart of our communities. We've got poverty that we're blind to, that sits right in front of our very eyes, and will continue to do so until we step up to the plate and organise more effectively to take it on. So a great question. Of course, nationalisation's got a role to play. And if we're going to be producing the sorts of goods that we need to produce, if we're going to diversify production, not necessarily away from what we're doing now, but to build on what we're doing now, if we're not going to be producing at the sort of volumes what we were producing post-COVID, then rather than laying off thousands upon thousands of workers, let's put that experience, those skills, those hands, the tooling, our plant and equipment to use producing the sorts of things that we actually do need to produce here in the UK to sustain our economy and transition it to meet the challenges of the future. And let's rebuild our economy on a more just settlement. You know, you didn't see many hedge fund managers or multimillionaires in that list of key workers when it came out, did you? You saw some of the most precarious workers, the lowest paid workers, doing vital key roles to sustain our economy, whether in health and social care, whether driving our public transport, whether delivering our goods, cleaning our streets, doing whatever it was that they were doing, often outsourced, privatised to the lowest cost denominator with their terms and conditions attacked and their trade union organisation undermined. So if we're going to rebuild better, if we're going to build back better an economy, a new politics, we've got to win that. We've got to win that. That is not just going to happen. It's not, and never just going to happen anywhere. We need to organise ourselves to do that, which is why the people, I'm so proud of the People's Assembly, is that coalition, that umbrella over all sorts of organisations that share our values. We don't seek to take over an organisation. We share our values under the umbrella of the People's Assembly, and we move forward on those issues that we can agree on, like the anti-austerity politics that help us transform our party, quite apart from anything else. So I see huge opportunities in the future, opportunities for us to build that alliance, to link up with our trades councils, to grow our unions, to get our people more active in our communities, to use Unite's community membership to do that as well, which is a home for working people that are not in work. You like the unemployed workers unions of the 1920s that Peter was talking about, and the unemployed workers centres. Let's rebuild them. You know, let's give a confidence back to our movement. That's our challenge. That's everybody's challenge on this call, and millions more outside of it. But we can do that. I'm very confident we can do that. If we can inspire our people to stand up, we can change society for the better for all of us.
Thanks, Steve. I think that is a great point to be ending on. One of the questions in the chat box was, how do we capitalise on the growing awareness on the pay and rights issues that have been 19. And I think position for all of us. The question now is how we actually create that. And as you said, that is a job for us all. It's not going to be done without hard work. So for everyone that is part of of today's meeting. I think that is an issue for us. We need to take away all the information that we've had today, circulate it on our own Facebook pages, circulate it to our union branches, take it to our trades councils, because trades councils already have links across branches within their community. And we are a powerful force if we choose to exercise that right in our communities with our community. We have 3 minutes left of the hour. And I said at the beginning, this is the 20th session, Making Sense of the Crisis, organised by the People's Assembly. And I think I'd like to call Steve Turner back in to close this session. Steve is the one of the key officers of the People's Assembly nationally, so I think it's appropriate, as we're taking a pause, that he actually end this meeting. So Steve, over to you.
Okay, all right, look, thanks Moz for your fantastic chairing. As always, another great session, the 20th that we've held. Thanks Cad for your insight, of course, as always, not just into your specific area of work and responsibility, but for your wider political insight as well, and your passion around building that better, fairer society for all of us. And of course to Peter, not just for the work that you do day in, day out as a trade unionist, a leader in the NEU in the Northwest, but that alliance that you're building there, that programme of work, that vision that can inspire so many people outside of the Northwest to pick up on a proposal that puts working people, our families and our communities at the heart of any new economy, any build, recovery and rebuild strategy from COVID. You know, we've got many changes. I think this has been a great panel. So, you know, I just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank Ramona behind the scenes, Laura for all the work that she's done over the course of the last 19 sessions, 19 weeks also, when we've been doing those Thursday night sessions, understanding the crisis, a fantastic piece of work done online by the People's Assembly. And I want to thank all of you that are listening in. We're not a bureaucratic body, we're a body of volunteers, people that build their own campaigns in their communities, people that don't just join unions, they own their unions. Don't just join a trade union, get engaged with your union. Don't expect somebody to come in and resolve your difficulty. Organise to resolve your problems. It's you are your trade union. So don't just join it and pay your money. Join it, get involved, get active, build it, organise, fight back. That's how we win. That's how we win industrially, and that's how we win in our wider communities as well. Taking those arguments back out into the pubs and clubs, onto the football terraces, on the bus, in the high street, wherever it may be, wherever we're having these discussions, we need to have the confidence to be able to have the sort of discussion we're having now, win the battle of ideas for that better politics, that fairer economy for all of us, to make that transition to the greener, cleaner world that we all know we need to make sure our planet has a future, as well as ourselves, of course. So look, as a very proud People's Assembly chair, you know, we're going on holiday, or the People's Assembly is going on holiday for a couple of weeks now. We're going to be back at the end of summer, fighting fit, refreshed, ready to go, back online. And as soon as day X comes, when we can get back on them streets, we'll be back on those streets as well. People are already doing that now. Smaller groups are doing that. You know, it's about confidence. It's about people being responsible. We've got a deadly pandemic. We've got a deadly virus out there that is killing tens of thousands of people. So whatever you do, be safe doing it. Be careful doing it. But as soon as we can get out there and we can organise as we best organise, on our streets, in our communities, winning those arguments, winning people to the argument for a fairer, better world, a fairer, better politics, and certainly a fairer, better Britain. As soon as we can bring down a Tory government, that's it.
Thanks, Steve, for closing the meeting. Well done, everybody. I have to close the meeting, so I just want to say onwards and upwards for all of us. The future is ours. We have to make it happen. Nobody will make it happen for us. So get out in your villages, in your towns, in your cities. Stay safe, but we've got the job to do. Okay, so goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks very much.